Welcome to CUV.com. I'm David Medor. We have Tiffany Couch here with her fourth report regarding the CRC light rail tolling project. This report has to do with financing and
correct.
Costs.
That's
We've been
correct.
told that this is a $3.5 or $3-point-some billion project. That's the cash price. We're not paying cash. So you'd like to be able to walk us through what looks like is going to be what we're going to pay in the way of tolls and what we're banking on when it comes to the financing costs for this project.
That's correct.
Okay, where do you want to start?
Well, I think we can just start from the beginning and remind everybody what the project is and what we're paying for here, at least what's being proposed to everybody.
Okay.
This, of course, is the CRC, or Columbia
So
River.
we've got a map here for it.
We've got a map, the Columbia River crossing map. And they tell us what the project's going to be in terms of interchanges, a bridge, and light rail. And they also tell us how much each of these components of the bridge is going to cost. And according to the Columbia River crossing, they're telling us...
You mean the bureaucracy?
They're telling us that it's going to be a $3.5 billion project before any cost overruns, before any financing of the tolls, etc.
Okay, so if we had the cash sitting in the bank, that's how much it would cost, $3.5 billion. If there's no financing costs, there's no collection costs, we stay on budget,
That's
we
correct.
get it done.
That's correct. And it's going to cost a little over $5 billion. So in addition to the $3.5 billion to build it, we're going to pay for $1.9 billion in addition for interest costs, operation and maintenance of the bridge, and insurance and tolling related costs for the next 30 years. So it is actually a $5.5 billion project, again, before cost overruns, and again, based on the numbers in the CRC environmental impact statement. In addition to the $3.5 billion, we're going to have to pay for interest on a loan. So just think if you and I went and bought a house, and we bought a $100,000 house, well, our payments aren't based on that $100,000, right? That payment is based on the principal of that $100,000 plus the interest we pay to the bank, and sometimes even what we call an escrow account where we put in our insurance and our property taxes. So we pay for all of those things in one monthly payment.
One thing I'm curious about, Tiffany, these costs, none of this comes with any kind of reference point. None of it comes with any kind of comparable.
That's correct.
It's just numbers that mean they just stand alone. We have no idea whether this is 10 or 100 times what the normal expected amount would be for these numbers.
That's correct. So I've not benchmarked these numbers against another project in the state or another project in the United States. These clearly come from, and I can just put it right here, comes from these are their numbers, and I'm just putting them all together instead of over several pages, putting it in one chart, saying here's what they're telling us.
So you got the detail that makes this up.
I do. That's been frustrating for me because I am a numbers person. I like to understand something before I walk into it or before my clients walk into it, sort of a due diligence. What's this really going to cost? And it's been a little frustrating as legislators ask questions, as we look at documents to say, can somebody just give me the number? Like, what's the number? And that's been my role here, is to try and figure out what's that number. And according to the CRC, that number is $1.9 million in 30-year financing and expense costs plus $3.5 billion. So $1.9 billion plus $3.5 billion. Sorry, let's just put this map here.
All right.
$3.5 billion for the entire project. So that together says over the next 30 years, we're going to have to come up with $5.5 billion. Right now, all they've really told us is how they're going to pay for the $3.5 billion. And during the meeting last week, they explained that this $1.9 billion, the interest on the bonds, the operation and maintenance costs, and the tolling costs will be covered by tolls. So I think it's important to understand that $1.9 billion is going to be covered by tolls. All of those extras.
Almost $2 billion covered by tolls.
That's right. In addition to the $1.2 billion in capital costs that are going to be covered by tolls as well.
We're expecting the state to come up with $900 million, right?
$450 each, Washington,
$450.
Oregon.
Okay, and we just saw the Milwaukee Light Rail received $650 million from the feds of our gas taxes, and they had to come up with, locally, a match, $650 million, all to build 4 miles of track. 4 miles of track. And that could have, how much would it cost to widen the I-5 freeway through the heart of Portland to actually solve the congestion problem?
I don't know.
I wouldn't.
It's certainly a question to ask. So we have $900 million from each state. They're banking on $850 million in a grant funding from the federal government.
Okay.
They are then banking on state-backed bonds of $500 million and a Tiffany loan of $500 million. So that's a little over $1 billion in loans that will all have to be paid for with tolls.
A Tiffany loan, why do they call it a Tiffany loan?
It's a transportation infrastructure. It's an acronym that the
it's
federal government.
one more way we can borrow money.
That's correct.
Long-term debt.
This is long-term debt. State-backed bonds or long-term debt. Both will be paid for by tolls. They are also banking on $400 million in federal discretionary funds, basically an earmark, basically a $400 million from the feds with it's a grant money. It's not money that has to be paid back. And then the rest, $200 million in tolls, $147 million has already been given by the states to pay for the environmental studies, and then a little bit more in tolling revenue. So this is their project costs. They're saying this is how we're going to pay for the $3.5 billion. But what's important to understand is that none of this money, and we've put it down here, all of these with an A, the money from the states, the money from the feds, and the federal discretionary, that's $2.1 billion. None of that money, zero, has been committed. So that's not guaranteed. And then the rest, $1.2 billion, they're banking on receiving in tolls. Number one, we're not considered for the $850 million at all until the states commit their portion of the money. Number two, the $850 million has to be applied for every year at a total maximum amount of $100 million per year. And we are competing for those funds with all other projects around the United States of America, number one. And number two, we're banking on the fact that those funds will even be available 8 and 9 years into the future.
Has anybody done any comparables to see, are we inflating these numbers by a factor of 10 or 100?
Oh, no comparables have been done. But I would like to explain that, so right now, the $900 million is in jeopardy. According to the information that I have, 2 legislative sessions ago, they were hoping to get their $450 million match. It didn't happen. It did not also happen in last year's legislative sessions. So now they're hoping in 2013 that both the Washington and Oregon state legislatures will commit their $450 million. So right now, the $900 million is in jeopardy and the $850 million is in jeopardy. But I would like to skip down here to the federal discretionary and listen to our next clip so that we can understand a little bit more about that number.
Okay, we'll go ahead and play that clip.
Okay. Regarding federal funds, remember in the slide that we had presented earlier, we had assumed that approximately $400 million would come from federal discretionary funds. The story is not as rosy at the moment, but we still remain hopeful here. With the passage of MAP 21, significant changes in the federal aid highway program, most discretionary and programs were eliminated and there were no earmarks. So for the moment, we do not have a discretionary earmark for this project.
So what she's explaining there is when they put their funding plan together, there was a program, a federal program for federal discretionary dollars. And under this plan, it's the projects of national significance, where the CRC said, you know, this project is a bi-state project, it's an interstate highway project, it's a nationally significant project. We should be able to compete for $400 million in discretionary funds. Discretionary funds are basically funds from the general fund of the United States government, and it's kind of like, it's basically an earmark where they hand the money to you and there are no strings attached. There's no requirement for a local match. There's no requirement to pay the money back. So she's explaining that the picture's not rosy because the program in which they thought they would receive those funds no longer exists. So what she's saying is this discretionary fund is from the general fund of the United States government. She's saying that it was discontinued in fiscal year 2013 and is not expected to be continued in the future. They're not currently operating under a budget that has these discretionary funds available. And she basically says, we're hoping that by the end of the completion of the project, these funds will become available. And so we're hoping that by the end of the construction period, that the $400 million will come in.
So we're basing the finances of this project are based on wishful thinking.
Well, I think what's important is she's explaining that when this federal discretionary fund was available, remember it's not available right now. When it was available, there was $500 million available nationwide.
And that went away.
That went away. But let's back away from that.
Okay.
Let's go back to the $500 million available nationwide.
That was available.
We're asking for $400 million of that, 4/5.
For one project.
For one project nationwide. What we are not showing here, because they go on for an extended period of time and everybody will fall asleep, is they explain, I think Senator Rivers asks, well, what about the 520 bridge? What about the Alaska Way Viaduct? Are those projects asking for the same money? Yes. So we're not only competing with ourselves for the same $500 million, but we're competing nationwide, and we're asking for 4/5 of it. And so to even think that we would receive $400 million of the $500 million nationwide appears to be a bit of a stretch, number one. And number two, even though they know that this project is no longer in place, they're still banking on $400 million, again, in free or discretionary funds that are not available at this time. And there is no guarantee that they will be.
And so their conclusion is, instead of saying, well, let's hold off on this, the conclusion is then full speed ahead. How rational is that?
Well, it's certainly questionable at this point. The second part of our report really talks about tolls. There's been, especially of late in the newspaper and in some of the local blogs, as this, what are truly the cost of the tolls? What are tolls going to be? And the CRC project has given us those numbers, and I'd really like to talk to you about those so that everybody can understand.
Yeah, everybody wants to know basically, how does this affect me?
So I think the first thing we should show everybody is this debt schedule. This is not mine.
Whoa, that's a lot of fine print.
It's a lot of fine print, so just ignore it. I just want you to know that I did not make this schedule, but the CRC gave this to me, and they said this is our 30-year debt service schedule for the state-backed bonds. And what they did over here, just this first two columns, they said here's the fiscal year and here's the net tolling revenue.
Can I zoom in on that a little bit there so we
can
can just see that first? I can read a little better. Okay.
Big numbers.
This is dollars? So basically, this is the year.
These are dollars.
And this is the dollars per year that will be pulling out of our economy.
That's what they're going to collect for tolls. So they don't give us a total, so we totaled that. And of course, I don't have that in front of me, excuse me.
So basically, it looks like we're averaging 80-some to 90-some to $100 million per year
in toll collection.
Pulling money out of our local economy in order to service the debt and to pay for the light rail project.
So if you were to add up all of these large numbers,
it looks like you could, if this was 30 years ago, we could build the 205 bridge every other year.
One of the big questions everybody's asking is, what is that, if we're going to collect $3.3 billion in tolls, which that is their plan, not $1.2 billion. Remember, $1.2 billion is just to help build the capital project. We also have to pay.
That's about the cost of the whole project.
That's right, in tolls.
In tolls.
Because we have to collect for interest, we have to collect for operation and maintenance, we have to collect for the cost of toll. So we have to collect all of those things in the toll. And they're planning on a little more than $3 billion.
And after this is done, if we end up collecting this last one here, has the debt gone to zero?
Yes.
If they stay on target?
If they
then
stay on
this is
target,
what-
the debt goes to zero in 30
Okay.
years.
All right.